Welcome to the podcast, the Battle Tested podcast. We talk about all things.
All things.
You had a good way of putting it.
We talk about all things.
All things.
Creativity. All things creative.
All things creative. Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. Although we will focus quite a bit, and I made a pun there. Focus on imagery most of the time, and usually that involves what makes an image, the tools to make an image. And I don't draw. I know you draw, Ryan.
A little bit, yeah.
We can talk about that. But I think mostly we're going to be talking about imagery with cameras and things of that nature.
And I think that's mainly just because that's what we do. I mean, but I think a lot of the stuff and the topics we're going to talk about and discuss are pretty universal. So if that's not your medium, I'm sure we'll get to something that applies.
And so we were going back and forth on kind of what to call this thing. And just before we started, Ryan, you were like, it's just call it Battle Tested. And I was like, well, you know what? Actually, that's great, because not only is it, a shameless plug for the brand that we're trying to use to support our families and careers and everything like that. So, make sure that's going to be relaunching very soon. But also, it really encompasses the ethos, which is everything that we're talking about is going to be battle tested, meaning it works or it doesn't work. And we're going to talk about that. There's no official way of doing things. There's no like, oh, this is the way the industry does it. No, if it works to make great art, then it works.
Which I think is like with all of the new social medias and stuff that are blowing up, I think that's the way people are finally starting to think, that there isn't a set way. When we went through like so many decades of you have to do this is the fundamental way to do things. I think people are finally open to the fact that there's no one way to do it, and we can be the guinea pigs. We can go out there and we can test stuff, and if it doesn't work, we'll let you know. If it works, share the knowledge. Why not?
And I think the really cool thing about that, because this is what I've always done. I've always felt like I loved just making things work with the baling wire and the duct tape. I think that it really is, especially nowadays, the way you can go out and put things on the internet, get paid, get compensated, get noticed, get viewers. It validates the way, however you're doing it. And sometimes it's going to be less effective. Sometimes it's the wrong way of doing it. But if it works, you can't argue with it too much.
Right. This might be a little bit of a tangent, but I've got this sitting right in front of me and I'll show it off. Like, I legitimately made this camera out of gaff tape this week. Like, this is so backwards from everything out right now. In 2020, like 15 new cameras came out and everyone was about gear, new specs. And I just like sat in my room and I made a camera out of gaff tape. And the way things are like being shared online, no one would know the difference. Like the way Instagram like downscales everything anyways, and Facebook compression sucks. If I were to take a picture with this camera that turned out okay, I could share that. And it doesn't matter that it was taken on a gaff tape camera or a red camera. Like, quality is so insignificant these days. As long as it like looks good, you can pass it off.
And and that's the thing, is like, as long as you're actually passing it off. Because a lot of times people fall into this trap of like, well, they fall into the two categories. They get, and I do this all the time, they get gear crazy. It's like this camera, that camera, this light, this adapter, whatever. If I only had that, it would change my life. And that's only to a point. And the other side of that is, you don't want to fall too far into the I can do whatever with nothing, because unless you prove it that you can,
right,
then you can't just go around pretending like it's going to work. But you are totally right. So you shoot, what is that? You said it's a full format, medium format. What did you?
So this is
you made that because you're waiting for your body, right?
Yeah, large format. So I got the lens. It's going to be a 4x5 when it actually comes, but I got the lens and I wanted to make sure, because I bought this used. I mean, they don't make lenses anymore. So I wanted to make sure that still worked. So I made a ground glass myself and then made a body out of, because that's all a camera is a lens in a dark thing, taking a picture onto a sensor. So I just need a little dark enclosure, and then I made a ground glass that I could actually see to make sure that the lens works. And then I was like, hey, this actually works. Like, this is how cameras are made and were made hundreds of years ago.
So the cool thing about that is you could go out, shoot real estate with that, and come back with a product that looked amazing, that the client wouldn't know the difference, and that would be it. The caveat is that you couldn't show up and the client watch you do that,
right?
And them feel good about it, right? So we do have to be careful about that. But at the same time, like, we used to do that back in the day. We knew we could get a job done and it would look fine and look great on a certain camera format that we had. But the client was expecting, that was like back in the day when you'd build up the rig as big as you could, just because you had these teeny tiny DSLRs and you'd want to build it up to look like a cinema camera. Because the client's not going to know the difference. I mean, some do, but more often than not, if you're communicating correctly and you really know what you're doing, you can, the tools. And so we would build up these cameras into these huge rigs, and they wouldn't be any the wiser. So,
well, I think that's like a huge benefit of like our conversations is like you went through that. Like you graduated college and you were in the industry as like DSLRs started to become a thing. And like that was right in my high school days when the 5D came. Like people started taking the 5D Mark II seriously because of the HD video. And so like my whole career as it's been so far has kind of been all enveloped in that. Like TikTok obviously wasn't a thing, but like just for me personally to see that evolution, I kind of wonder how many clients these days would expect you to build your camera out huge. Because that's how it was. You had to make it look bigger than it was, right? Like you had to put a cage on the DSLRs, and the Black Magics now. They've changed the game.
I mean, and the other thing too is like the best thing about this, and I think what we're going to talk about in the podcast is that we're not always talking about clients though, because sometimes the client is yourself.
Yeah.
And as long as you're happy with what you're doing, that's all you need to do. And that's the beautiful thing about it is that as long as you're making something and creating, there's infinite opportunities out there. And I know people always talk about this, but it's like the cell phone, your freaking iPhone or whatever it is shoots way better format than what we were shooting professionally. Yeah, professionally years ago. And now obviously there's caveats to that and there's all kinds of little tweaks you want to talk about, but true, honestly, you can get a better image off. And some people do. Like I'll sit there and I'll look at, I have more cameras than I know what to do with, which is really sad. I feel bad for them. They all have their own little sad lives of not shooting. I'm like, oh, I should get them out shooting. But I look at people's reels, some of these younger guys, some of these older guys, whatever, and they've just tuned that GH5 or GH4 into something, and I look at it, I'm just like, this looks amazing. And they're like, oh, I shot this on this with the Lumix lens, and I'm just like, I could not do that. Right. How do I do that? Teach me the ways, So it's really not getting. I love talking about gear. We're gonna do a lot of talking about gear, but I also love stepping back and realizing that the gear is the least important part. Because 100%. You can do so much just by doing. And I like watching your journey with because I grew up like I said, I grew up doing film. So when I started, it was all film, and video was like, if you absolutely had to, you would do it for cost, but film was the way to do it, So watching you turn around and shoot a lot of film that's like super exciting. I love the way it looks and feels. It made me want to go back and get my vinyls from my parents' house. And And I'm afraid to bring them here though, because the kids might break them by accident.
I think they're a Frisbee and start throwing them around.
All right. So we have about 30 seconds left on this official podcast of talking about the initial idea of creativity and what we want to be seeing and doing and motivating people to do, which is be creative, create. And I always hesitate to say art because I don't want people to think too much into one category. But you were saying the other day, it's like, art is anything. So let's go with your definition. And I think I want to do some like motivational stuff and give away some lights to people, show us your art, giveaways, things like that to get people to start showing us stuff.
Yeah, we'll have to like make a hashtag and everything and get things going. But this is just kind of like the introductory episode, the welcome episode. We've got big plans for this. It's going to be exciting. We're just getting it off the ground. So welcome. We want to share some art with you guys. We want to see your art. The whole point is to make a community and to not just like, we don't want this to be something where like two guys who think they know what they're talking about are sitting and like talking down to people. We want to make this a discussion and a conversation and just show you what we've learned and what we're working on and see what you're working on. So,
because I mean, we do know a lot between the two of us, especially. There's a lot to be known, but there's a whole lot more that we don't know, tons. So that's the best part, is getting people involved. And I think we'll have some good guests on and talk about art.
I'm excited.
Okay, thanks for listening and hopefully watching. And we'll catch you guys next time.
Peace.